Alrighty, everyone ready? Welcome everybody. My name is Blake Berg. I'm the chapter lead for the New York City chapter of the Society for Construction Solutions. And we're a group that brings together like-minded individuals in the AEC industry to drive innovation via collaboration in our local cities. Before we jump into things today, it's important, we did this last month too, but if everyone could just take a minute to acknowledge all those who've lost their lives to this virus, all those who are currently suffering through the effects of the virus. Our thoughts and our prayers do go out to them, their family, and their loved ones. Similarly, it's important to recognize and keep in mind all those people on the front lines, the doctors, nurses, policemen, the firemen, postal service, the grocery store workers, the pharmacy workers, and all the essential workers, including those in our industry who have heroically chosen to put themselves at risk each day and show up to work in the interest of helping others. We're lucky really just to be able to sit in the comfort of our homes right now with power, running water, food, and be able to discuss what is a relatively light topic today. So appreciate all those folks on the front lines and all those who have been affected by the virus. Today's event, just so everyone's aware, it will be recorded and it will be made available for future reference via our LinkedIn page. So please make sure to go and follow us on LinkedIn and stay posted for future events and as well as communication between meetings by following us on LinkedIn. Today's panel, we've got a great panel lined up. It's an unbelievable turnout again, especially as compared to our in-person events. So one nice silver lining of things. So thanks so much for everyone for joining. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time and being brave to share their insights and their opinions with us. And a big special thank you to the rest of my board here for working hard behind the scenes to make this event possible. One other recognition I do have to give is my mother is actually in the crowd and it's her 65th birthday. Thank you, Mom, for joining. You made me nervous now, so thank you. All right, so for today's agenda, I'm going to continue for about 5 more minutes just talking about what our group is. Then we're going to get into panel introductions, get right into our virtual panel from there. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. And then at the very end is a special virtual breakout discussion and networking opportunity. Before we really jump into things, just a couple orientation notes. We made a last-minute decision to switch to this webinar format where you can see everyone, which is great for kind of keeping a connection between folks versus the other webinars out there. In the interest of being able to see who's talking, I recommend going into the speaker view, the active speaker view. It's at the top right corner of your screen. And that way you could just keep an eye on whoever's talking. Sorry, attendees, you are all muted and you will stay muted until the breakout discussions. Only our panelists can speak. But do not be shy. Please turn on your cameras and feel free to connect with the rest of the people in the crowd. Also, do stay comfortable at home. You know, I'm wearing sweatpants and feel very comfortable, so you all should feel nice and comfortable as well. We have a few interactive polls throughout, so please do stay on your toes and be ready to submit your responses quickly. And the last one is just for our panelists. We really do appreciate you guys stepping in here and offering your insights from what you're currently going through. Our panelists are being extremely open with us in the interest of driving collaboration through information sharing and just being honest, and they should not be held liable in any way for what they are saying. It's really just them expressing their opinions. Nothing's going to be a best practice or a rule or a law or any sort of governance right now. It's just an open discussion. With that, I'm going to try and launch our first poll here. And it's important that before we get going, we just understand who is in the crowd and where you guys are coming from. So you should all have a poll that comes up on your screen right now. Oh, sorry, I got the wrong one. It's my fault. Intro survey. Okay, round 2. So if you all could just answer a quick question, I'll share the results, but we just want to get a feel for who everyone is. Do you work in New York? What industry do you work in? And if it's your first event with us. And as they're coming out, we're about 30% construction, 30% architecture, 13% engineering, 19% consultant. 63% of us do work in New York City, and one of the gifts of what's going on is we are having a lot of people be able to call in from different places outside of New York, and we've got 62% of us are new to the New York City Construction Solutions Group. So thank you all for joining. And I'll end that and continue going here. So a little bit about who we are. The Society for Construction Solutions, it's a very informal group. We get together once a month, typically in person. And what we do is we just discuss what's going on in the industry. We try to showcase people who are really breaking ground in the industry with technology and innovation. Typically it is focused on construction, but we are trying to grow the group and include more architects, more technology firms, more consultants. And we really do want this group to be a well-known group within New York City. You know, I didn't know about the group before I joined it, but it's one of the best decisions I've made to get involved. It's completely extended my network, and it's been amazing to see people that ordinarily would be my competitors sharing information so we could drive this industry forward. At the bottom left side of the page there is a QR code. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. The meetings and kind of how they operate, once a month typically. We usually get in there and network for about the first half hour, and then we'll showcase a groundbreaker or two and showcase that to the group, have some open discussion, have some beers, pizza, and really just relax. And typically we get 50 or 75 people there, and who attend, it's AEC folks within the industry who really just want to drive innovation forward. And with that, we can really jump straight into the panel here. So I will hand things off to my co-host. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. But I will stop talking now.
Yeah, thanks, Blake. That was a great introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Diesner. I'm a co-lead the New York chapter of Society for Construction Solutions. I'm the host for today. It's my pleasure to moderate for what a great panel we have. I'm very excited to hear from these folks. So first, why don't we get started with introductions? I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their company and their role, and then we'll jump into the questions. So why don't we start with Lance, then Laura, and then Guy.
Sure thing. My name is Lance Amato. I'm principal at Vocon, which is an architecture and interior design firm with 3 offices: Cleveland, Ohio, New York, and Los Angeles. We have about 180 people firm-wide. And my practice and expertise is primarily in workplace interiors.
Great, welcome. Laura.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. So my name's Laura Patel. I'm the Director of Strategic Accounts at Density. I've been in the real estate space for over a decade at this point, but I spent the last year learning the prop tech ropes. So a little bit different side of the industry, given that I started out on the construction side of the fence. And specific to my business, I've spent the last year becoming as much of an expert as possible in an emerging field, but focused on occupancy sensors and the analytics platforms that we use to support them. At Density, we use, or we've taught a tiny little machine that mounts above any doorway or point of entry, and using artificial intelligence, we've taught it to detect humans that are either entering or exiting a space. Importantly, doing so without the use of any cameras or video technology. Pre-pandemic, our jam was helping really large companies with long-term strategic programs, often helping them to better understand how their millions of square feet within their portfolio were being utilized, and identifying underutilized space that could be comfortably divested or reallocated to growing departments within the business. And then in the new world we find ourselves in today, we've seen just a huge pivot to use cases that are largely geared now towards real-time occupancy analytics being used to support safe return to work programs, and specifically tied to monitoring and enforcing safe density standards. So kind of a funny time to work for a company called Density. I wish we could claim that we had the forethought back then, but just a sort of a happy circumstance. So excited to be here today and share some of what we're seeing and hearing in the market, and how our clients anticipate using prop tech to safely welcome their employees back to the office.
Thanks, Laura. Welcome. Guy.
Sure. Hi, it's Guy Geier. I'm managing partner of FXCollaborative Architects. We're about a 150-person firm in New York. We provide architecture, interior design, and planning services to a pretty diverse group of clients, including commercial office buildings, residential mixed-use projects, higher ed, cultural institutions, transportation, and workplace for corporate and not-for-profits. And we have been in business for 42 years, and we are currently located in Manhattan, but we'll be moving to Brooklyn in the fall and working on the transition from one place to the other through this very kind of trying and difficult period of time. But I think it's going to pay off in the long run, the way we do our work. So.
Great. Yeah, welcome. So I think we'll jump right into it. And Guy, maybe we'll stay with you since you're going to be moving offices and maybe thinking about layouts and whatnot. So, New York City obviously has been under, stay-at-home order for the last 10, 11 weeks. I think we're all anxious to get back to our normal lives. But there's a new normal. So Guy, from your perspective, I'd love to hear, what are some of the considerations that you have, both as a design professional and then also as business owner, going back to the office, and kind of what are some of the trends that you're seeing today?
Sure. Well, first of all, we none of us really know exactly when we're going to go back to the office because we have to wait for us to clear the 7 gates that the state has set up for us. But whenever that happens, I think that there's going to be a kind of immediate move that will have to do with bringing back kind of minimum number of people who are comfortable coming back to the office. And we're seeing this amongst all of our clients. So it's not going to be reoccupation like it was before. It's going to be some lower density. Work from home and the ability we have with technology to do that has kind of changed everybody's perspective on this. And clients that were not willing to embrace work from home before, just philosophically, are suddenly finding how well it's working. So they're a lot more open to this than they were in the past. For us, we were preparing to be a more work from home optional environment anyway, and we put all the technology in place long before, actually months before the pandemic struck and we were forced into it. But our plan when we go to Brooklyn is to have a much lower density workplace, have people working from home on a regular basis, and use the office space there as more of an amenity space where people will come together maybe for shorter periods of time to have meetings, to talk to clients, to do other things that they can't do physically in their home offices, and to obviously work collaboratively with their colleagues. So it's very important that we give those, kinds of spaces that allow that to happen.
Yeah, and obviously we're social animals, and that coming together, I think, is a big, important part of the work experience. Lance, you mentioned the need for increased flexibility on our call earlier this week, and I was wondering if you could share that theory with your thoughts about that with the group, and what are some of the implications for that?
Oh, sure thing. I think part of my experience also has to do with creating environments for pre-built conditions and landlords as well, and the conversations in terms of how do you market and develop space planning efforts to entice people to rent space has brought up a lot of variables to it, right? And so, it's been interesting. The studies we've done and the realization of following the guidelines for COVID, the radiuses, and obviously the population de-densification. We found that space is certainly is very generous, but there is a huge proportion of people that have opted not to come back to work. So the real estate actual square footage may be of equal or lesser need than people had originally anticipated. But with that being said, the conferencing spaces, those flexible areas, may have been impacted the most. you have to consider if you're sitting at an 8-person conference table, traditional layouts space those chairs out of 36 feet apart, 30 inches apart, 36 feet, 36 inches or 30 inches apart. And an 8-person conference table may only accommodate 3 people come day one of this scenario. So how do you provide flexible areas that can, for one, work with today's technology, which is very flexible, but 2, kind of be adapted towards the guidelines and rules and regulations we have to follow. So we're going to find a lot of flexibility, a lot of informal and formalization of conferencing spaces, a lot of blends of work from home / in-person conferencing rooms. We're going to see kind of the shift of what we would consider a private meeting space entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it could be a little bit strange with 3 people in one conference room, I guess.
Well, you also have to realize that these rooms, the actual architecture of these rooms is not going to change. The room size will stay the same.
Yep.
So it is the creative aspect of what you do within those areas has to certainly adapt to today.
Sure, and I want to bring Laura in here for her perspective. Laura, your clients are mostly Fortune 100, who obviously are managing quite a bit of square footage in their office space. What are some of the shifting priorities that you're hearing in your conversations with them? I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big distinction is when we're talking with our clients, you sort of have to split the conversation 2 ways. One is talking about what, and I hate this term, I think it's gotten super overused at this point, but what the new normal will be. And what I mean by that, if you strip away the cliche, is just what is going to be the enduring impact insofar as how this forever changes, if at all, the way that we design and use our workplaces. That I'm super interested to kind of unpack a little bit more in this discussion. But what we're talking more so with our clients with right now, which is I think the only thing they are comfortable discussing, is how they are going to adapt their existing spaces in order to address the immediate needs, which is some of what Lance was unpacking there. So not making dramatic changes to rejig their design standards as a company or how they go about new construction of spaces. That just seems, I think, too dramatic and polarized, as much as we might hear a lot of New York Times and Cushman Wakefield articles about how this is going to forever change the way that we set up our workspaces. Most of the end users we speak with are just not prepared to make long-term commitments like that and are more so looking to make temporary modifications that are going to allow them to safely get people back into the office in the short term. And when I say short term, I should clarify that for most companies, they're looking at 2 to 3 years as being short term right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, beyond that, who knows what the impacts or long-term effects are going to be. In those conversations, short-term wise, my understanding is it's, their concerns are obviously with social distancing, but also with touching less things. Could you elaborate a little bit on some of the philosophy there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so there's 2 things that we have to factor. One is, what are all of the ways that we can adapt the workplace in order to enhance safety? Obviously, we know that one of the ways that the virus is transmitted is through, or at least we think, there still actually hasn't been conclusive science on this, but we think that it can be transferred through touching of surfaces that someone who is infected with the virus touched before you. So I think as part of the mechanism for at least trying to facilitate as safe as an environment as possible, there has been a push towards really any type of technology that will allow you to go touch-free. So whether that's a fobbing system that allows you to just use your phone as opposed to swiping something, whether that's doors that are going to be motion censored, adapting bathroom fixtures so that everything is hands-free. I think that's probably the technology that we're going to see the most quickly adopted. But I think a lot of the changes that are actually going to be the most impactful are actually going to be behavioral. They're going to lend themselves to things like what Lance was mentioning. And actually just this week, which I thought was interesting, again, coming back to the irony of being called density, there's a lot of articles that were released this week that were talking about the fact that it really has very little to do with the density of cities. It has to do with the density of spaces. And that's going to be the hardest burden that we overcome in trying to mitigate large clusters of infections that may start to pop up as we transition people back into not just the workplace, but also sporting events and restaurants, et cetera.
Yeah. Lance and Guy, do you want to weigh in on that aspect of it as well?
Well, I do think that, you know, the de-densification is going to be a big part of at least the early stage re-entry into spaces. So there'll be fewer people, there'll be space more further apart, but there'll also be, as Laura said, there'll be a more of a dependence on personal habits, right? So you're going to be expected to wear a face mask when you're walking around in an office space between anywhere except at your workstation. You're going to be expected to clean your hand, wash your hands, and you know, take personal responsibility to separate yourself from other people in the environment. And we're working for a healthcare institution on their office space right now. And that's the attitude that they're taking, that people have to take personal responsibility. And, you know, their infectious disease people at their hospital have looked at all of these things like plastic face shields or guards in front of desks and other kinds of additive elements and said, you know, these really don't do anything. They might be kind of placebos that make people think that the things are benefiting them, but the reality is it comes down to personal hygiene and cleanliness and keeping surfaces clean. So I think short term, that's what's going to happen. Longer term, I do think that there'll be new planning standards that we'll start to look at that will have fewer people, lower density, more space per person, and what the end result, whether it's any less space or more space total for an organization, will just depend a lot on what their own kind of operational guidelines are and how much things like work from home, remote work factor into how much space they actually have to provide.
Yeah.
I want to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
yeah.
You go ahead, Lance. I'll go after.
Okay. You know, on the same and parallel topic and how it reflects the technology, right? And you know, work starts when you get in your car or on your train and get to come to work. And that's a separate conversation that frankly, none of us could really answer that question. But you know, work starts when you enter the building and how it applies to technology. A resounding answer that almost everyone has heard on any survey or any webinar is people want to feel safe when they're at work. And the controllability factor, the things and trends that you might see in terms of technology is security, obviously, is a huge asset. And I've been on plenty of webinars where people are adapting the ability for cell phone-based technologies and things where you don't have to take your card reader out, or you know exactly who's allowed to go to your space and what time they're going into it, and they're cleared for it. Those types of those applications where there's more personal control and comfort for whether it be the tenant, the owner, or you know, even specifically the organization, is something I think would probably be adapted towards day one and into the future long term. The touchless, the less you touch, the less you control, the more people will feel comfortable, because a lot of these things, at least as we have heard, we're not medical professionals, said these things are being controlled by touch. I think that outside of that, there will be a lot of, as we were talking about, sensor technologies. But I have to read, again, we're constrained by the architecture of our environment. And 65% of this audience is based in Manhattan. And we know that Manhattan is a bunch of very old buildings and very tight spaces. And so when we think about what are we going to do as professionals in construction design, how are we going to reduce traffic and congestion and consolidation in zones? And sometimes they can be avoided and sometimes they can't. The restroom technologies of sensorless faucets are great, but what happens in an 80 square foot restroom when you have more than 3 people in it? You know, there's control factors that people have to consider, and it's certainly things that we have to explore.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, one of the most interesting conversations that I have had amid all of this it continues to be with HR, because HR folks are trying to figure out exactly what you were describing, Lance, how to implement tools, processes that are going to enhance the sense of safety that people have when coming into the office. Because a lot of the efforts that are going to be the most effective and the most costly from a company standpoint, like increased janitorial services, they won't have visibility on. And so I think we had an interesting conversation, Lance, last week where you asked me about thermal sensors and how effective I thought those were, which, I'm not really in a position to speak to, but I did happen to talk to a very, very large owner today. And he echoed the sentiments I had shared with you at that time, which was those are going to become table stakes that folks are going to expect when they arrive back at a building in order to enhance the sense of safety that they have entering the workplace, whether or not they actually do anything meaningful in terms of helping to gatekeep with people coming into the work environment that may or may not have COVID. Several people are asymptomatic. Many people don't exhibit symptoms for several weeks. And so taking a temperature isn't necessarily going to ensure that no one's coming into the space that has COVID. And bringing it into our world, employers want to be able to provide occupancy data, I think, in order to empower their employees so that they have visibility before they go into restrooms. One of the most absurd applications when I got a first call about it, but it's actually been one of the things that we've seen the most companies approach us about is wanting to feed occupancy data through to screens that are on the outside of restrooms. And it's because, to your point, those are the tightest space in the work environment. Once you're in there, you've already put yourself in harm's way. And so I think the more they can empower their staff to feel a sense of control, none of us are scientists on this panel or healthcare professionals, but the more that we can empower employees with tools that will at least provide a psychological sense of safety, the idea is that will empower them, that will encourage them to want to come back to the office when the time is right.
Yeah, absolutely. People will expect, kind of some basic level of comfort for them to want to come back into the office. Back to de-densifying the office. I'm curious, Lance. With the proliferation of AR and VR, do you see that as a tenable solution to provide the feeling of being, camaraderie or togetherness without the risks of disease transmission?
That is a loaded question. So we're speaking to our world, I guess, right? So and when I answer this question, I'm speaking to the AEC industry, not necessarily people that do something outside of it. But we have to do a fair balance. For one, we know people will be home or working out of flex offices in the suburban markets or et cetera, that, and it'll be quite some time, because we've learned that basically through this entire time, we planned for a certain de-density, and then when HR gotten into play, we've realized that it's even less so. We have to make people feel comfortable. And so what technologies can we utilize to enhance our environments? And a lot of people that were utilizing three-dimensionality and kind of the stakes of the game might see a benefit of augmented reality, or even holographic reality, or technologies that were probably in the head of the curve to have a more viable collaborative solution, and understanding what constructible environments are, knowing that you can utilize our programs that we use to develop these environments, and actually, whether it be cloud-based or collaborative based, we need to actually enhance those environments so we can push design, present design, adjust design, and involve it moving forward. It just comes to play that when you have fewer people, when you have many people meeting in very different areas, what's the best tools technology-wise to talk about construction projects? And it might be the time that we actually embrace three-dimensionality into it.
Yeah, very interesting. I have
a follow-up question, actually, to Lance and to Guy. Looking at some of the some of what has been written. So Facebook came out like this afternoon, I want to say 2 hours ago, saying that by 2030, they actually anticipate moving 50% of their workforce to work remote. And Guy, you sort of alluded earlier in the panel that you guys, with the planning and design of your Brooklyn space, you had actually intended to move people largely to working remotely, which was great forethought on your part. I'm curious, so absent, collaboration for productivity purposes, how did both of you look at when thinking about moving your teams to a more work from home and virtual platform? How do you think about keeping your cultures alive as a firm? Because I think that's actually the thing that is lost with not having people congregate in person. Yeah,
well, that's a really good question, and it's something that we're kind of trying to sort out all the time. It's very different when you've had a certain number of people and they've been around for a long time, and we have many long-term employees and now they're working from home. You can do virtual happy hours and you can do virtual office meetings, and you still have a sense of everybody because so many people know each other to begin with. It's bringing new people on board. We actually have hired a few people since we went on work from home, and they've never been in the office. Younger architects who are coming out of school and have to be trained to be architects, and those are going to be the challenges. But I think the tools are with us, and we'll gain more expertise with these tools to be able to, integrate people into the culture of the firm. And the culture may change a little bit as a result of this, but I do also think, like I said before, where the office is going to be seen more as an amenity and a place for gathering, and maybe not all the time, but hopefully we'll get to a point where we can gather for an all-office meeting back in our space, and we have the space that's big enough for that to happen and keep everybody, socially separated. But I think that a lot of that will still happen virtually, and I think the definition of the culture will evolve. We've been around for 42 years, and there have been a lot of changes in the way that the firm is organized and the culture of the firm over that period of time. And I think that will continue. The other changes will happen, and hopefully, for the better. One of the things, for instance, we've been talking about is that under this kind of new remote working scenario, we may be able to hire people that we would never have had access to before. That we could hire an expert in a certain area of architecture that lives in North Carolina, that we would never convince them to move to New York, but we can bring them into the fold and have them working virtually with our teams in ways that we couldn't before, which adds to the to the overall culture of the firm. So I think we have to look a little bit outside the normal modes of operation and see what this really what this really offers us.
Yeah, that was actually it's ironic to see what the newspapers will run with as the taglines in the articles. There was a very small footnote that said in the article that I read, at least, that this is something that Facebook had been considering for quite a while. It was very deliberate because it allows them to tap into a global talent pool, as opposed to really struggling to find talent in the San Francisco Bay Area and in New York, where a lot of people just can't afford to live. But obviously it's sort of now being provided as another example of the collateral damage of the pandemic. But I think it's very thoughtful what you said about being able to really expand the reach of the candidates that you would otherwise not be able to hire just because they don't reside in a city where you maybe have an office.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's kind of a silver lining here, the ability to do that. So we've talked a lot about the health and wellness aspect of of this pandemic, and I'm wondering, Guy, is there a tie-in to sustainability initiatives at your firm or kind of more generally?
Sure. I think we are looking at expanding our thought process about what sustainability actually means, and health and wellness in in buildings is becoming, you know, it has been for a while, but it's become something that I think our clients are recognizing to be an important feature of the design we do, not just ourselves. It's becoming actually, I think, easier to convince clients now to think about health and wellness in an environment, and incorporating features into the space that may have been more difficult in the not too distant past. You know, we often propose things like green walls or other sustainable features in spaces that they would kind of not laugh off, but dismiss because they just didn't think that it had a lot of value. Now those kinds of features, I think, will be more appreciated. And these things will also become bigger factors in attraction of new talent and retention of people, because these are factors that people are going to weigh in their decisions about who they're going to work for and where they're going to work. So it definitely is going to dial it up. I think there'll be some challenges because some of the things that we're looking at in mechanical systems relative to higher filtration, larger numbers of air changes, other things like that are going to actually be at odds with energy savings in many cases. So we're going to have to work really hard to figure out how to balance the two sides of that equation to make it work.
Yeah, and it sounds like, you know, from your conversations with clients, they're more open to those type of sustainability initiatives, that they're maybe taking that more seriously than they had in the past. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I think the touchless aspects of our environment are going to be a bigger factor. If we can control lights and control heating and air conditioning through voice commands and touchless commands, these are all going to hopefully benefit us in terms of energy usage.
Yeah, I agree. And I think everyone, not just, you know, owners, have become more open-minded as a result of this. I mean, I can just think of, you know, some software companies or whatnot in prop tech or construction tech that maybe were less open to integrating are doing so more. Laura, would you say that's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that typically most companies in the prop tech side, as with most SaaS-based companies, a lot of their efforts are driven by customer demand as much as organizations would love to spend developer hours just for the sake of innovation. I think given the fact that the real estate space are all really rallying around one challenge right now, much like the medical field is rallying around vaccine development, it's sort of directed a multitude of companies to focus on solving the same set of challenges. And so we've certainly seen a huge uptick in the appetite for collaboration and also integration across platform.
Yeah.
I would also say, to feed into the sustainability issue, I think we'll be using new technologies, whether they're robotics or, as Lance talked about, VR, AR, and prefabrication on the construction projects that will be both more sustainable as solutions in terms of the way we deliver the products to the field, but also will address the issues we have, you know, of workers on site and social distancing of workers on site. And these will, I think, be huge changes that will happen more quickly now as a result of this.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that the pace of change is definitely picking up. To your point about
this is such a good example of the necessity is the mother of invention, right? The construction industry will only innovate when the pain of continuing to do things the way we always have finally outweighs the pain and uncertainty of trying something new, or if there's a pandemic.
That's been the case always, isn't it?
Yeah. I can't remember whose quote this is, but, you know, there's a quote of, you know, never waste a good crisis. So this is.
I think I know whose quote that is. Yeah. We'll go there. So I guess we have about 5 minutes before we'll go to Q&A. Other than the technologies and software that we already kind of touched on, what's exciting to you as far as, you know, furthering some of the goals that we spoke about around, keeping people safe, safer, or as safe as possible when they do return to work. Lance, maybe we can start with you and go from there.
I actually think that the unknown is probably the most exciting thing that I can perceive out of this one. The fact that people are actually willing to embrace unique ideas is really interesting to me. And the fact that, every single week the conversation changes, and the conversation is actually entertained, which is something, again, to that point, ideas are embraced during times of challenges. I will say technology aside, I think that people are most definitely going to appreciate their time at home and with their families. I think that people are going to respect those times with their families more and more, and truly respect that balance, because a lot of us don't have that much balance right now. And we took it for granted before this, right? I think many people will probably respect it and be very cognizant of it moving forward once we get out of this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Laura, Guy?
So I would say the thing I'm most excited about, next to HR and people costs, running a portfolio in your real estate in general is every company's second biggest operating cost. And yet it is the only aspect of most businesses that we have absolutely no visibility into. We design spaces and then we sort of walk away and we hope that they are running optimally, but we have absolutely no analytics or ground truth into how they get large or how they get used, with the exception of companies who have been very, very pioneering and innovative in looking at sensor technologies and deploying IoT. Or companies who invested in hiring human beings to go around and take observational analysis of how conference rooms and desks got used, which I still, it blows my mind that is a job, but it exists out there. And so to that end, I think the thing that I'm most excited about, which is a little bit self-serving, but as someone that loves this industry, I'm really excited that we will finally have something that's hopefully serves as a catalyst where nice to have technologies that have been readily available but not adopted en masse are finally becoming ubiquitous, where it is not just the most pioneering and innovative organizations who maybe have very large budgets and could afford to tinker in the past. It's now even the most antiquated organizations are reaching out because there's suddenly this burning need that is going to force them to get a foot in the door in trying IoT technology. And my hope is that will become sort of the point in history that this becomes ubiquitous, such that we're able to find, CBRE had a study last year and they averaged that 40% of all commercial real estate in the US is leased and paid for, but vacant. And so my hope is that this is bringing this back to a sustainability standpoint as well, that this is going to be the enormous change maker within our industry, which is going to shine a spotlight on all of the opportunities for optimization within people's portfolios.
Great.
And for me, what's exciting is that, I mean, we've spent most of today talking about workplace and offices and office buildings. What is interesting and I think going to be fascinating to me is how to apply many of these ideas we talked about to other industries and other building types. With higher ed, we're just now starting the serious conversation about what it means to have a classroom with half as many students in it, or how do you teach remotely? And of course, most institutions were forced into it, but does this change the very model of how you deliver education going forward, and what are dormitories in the future? And you can go through other types of buildings and environments, whether they're sporting or arenas or other things where these ideas are going to fundamentally change the way we design the buildings to begin with and how we have to remodel them for the future. So I think that's what's exciting going forward.
Yeah, so I think those are some really great answers. We're just about 10 minutes to the top of the hour, so I think we'll go to Q&A. And there's some great questions from the audience. And this one is actually related to Guy, what you were just saying. Over the past 15, 20 years, we've noticed a trend towards an open office layout. And we have a question from Jason Friedman. Is the open office going to be done with? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think so. I think it will change, and the nature of openness will change. I think the 5-foot benching model is probably a thing of the past, because I obviously people are not going to want to sit 5 feet away from each other across a benching solution that you're staring right at the other guy on the other side of the desk. So I think we will see some return to, first of all, larger footprints per workstation that may be balanced off against smaller offices, because offices will not be places where you'll meet anymore. So you'll have an office, maybe you have one visitor chair, and that person will sit 6 or more feet away from you when you're having a conversation. But I don't think we'll see closed offices with conference tables inside them. And conferencing and collaborative work will occur in a different kind of environment. So I think we'll still see workstations, because it is an effective way to plan the space, and it is an effective way to enhance communication between colleagues as well. So I don't see that going away.
Right. So open office is here to stay. That's good.
In a different mode, in a very different mode than what we've kind of been evolving to. I think there'll be a movement back to larger workstations and certain amount of partitioning around those workstations.
Yeah.
One other, or maybe 2 other thoughts to add to that. Especially in a city like New York, where you have union janitorial service, the beauty of unassigned and sort of hoteling desk configurations is, at the end of the day, you clean up everything and you leave, and the only thing that's left on that desk is a keyboard, a mouse, and perhaps a monitor. You contrast that with, I've been living in my spare bedroom now for 2 months, and I have my glasses case and 5 coffee mugs that I haven't bothered to take the 5 steps to my kitchen. I have some empty gum wrappers. I have nail polish. There's all of these sort of tchotchkes that I've collected and assumed around me. And the same happens in an office environment, which union janitorial staff will not clean around. And so when you start to, actually factor in real life, provided that people are allowed to sit far enough away from each other so that social distancing is possible, I would actually argue that you're going to be able to create a safer environment from a sanitation standpoint, going with free address as opposed to having assigned seating. And if I have an assigned seat, but my neighbor chose to come in today, and that is her desk and this is mine, you're actually putting people in a less safe environment than if you have completely unassigned open environment where they could, go across the office to a space where no one is occupying yet that bank of desks.
Yeah, I also think it's going to accelerate the use of laptops in the office. I think that basically you will have a screen or 2 screens or whatever, and you will have your personal laptop and mouse that no one else will touch except you, and you'll put it on the desk, and it'll link wirelessly to the network and put whatever images you want up on your screen in front of you. But the day of shared mouse and typing appliances will be gone. You won't do that anymore. It'll be your own device.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to that, I agree with Guy. The open office, I don't believe it's going to die. It's going to be very different. The real question is with all these large corporations embracing work from home and the flexibility of the team A, team B scenario, how fixed is office design going to be moving forward, which goes back to the flexible environment. How fixed is furniture going to be? How fixed is a wall going to be? How fixed is a layout going to be? Because the things will flex and change. We are talking about 2 or 3 years of this. People will be hired, people will move, there will be potential adjacent offices and suburban markets of teams. I mean, how is the interior environment going to effectively and economically shift to go with the times? And we're adhering to a 6-foot radius today. It could be 12 feet in 6 months. We just don't know. There's a lot of unknowns there, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and we just got a question on that from Alec around the unknowns. So he asks, how are we designing for something that is still largely unknown in the future? How are you helping clients do that? So just to your point.
It's really interesting. It's a lot of conversations we're having today. How do you design for something that you're unknown? And you have to design for flexibility. And it's designing for most effective flexibility of the most flexible environments, which implement, traditional, even sustainable standards into today's type of workplace. And that might mean that even concrete investments of the traditional aspects of hard construction and furniture of day one applications might be, done in rental-based furniture for time beings, or, prefabricated environments that are mobile. And there's a lot of points that have to be adapted, because not one person knows the answer for the next 3 years. You have to be the smartest, effective person you could be for your clients moving forward. And that does offer the most broadest solution you can for kind of the flexible environment moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that, as people start to think how they're going to respond to this long term, they should be wary that maybe they go a little bit too far in one direction. Laura, you brought this up in our call earlier, specifically around what we thought about was going to be the new normal after 9/11. That didn't end up being exactly what was hyped. So can you explain that a little bit more?
Oh my gosh, I have such imposter syndrome speaking to that, because first of all, I was in elementary school, I think, and second of all, I didn't live in New York. But just in speaking to lifelong New Yorkers who I think are quite frustrated by the level of fear mongering that is going on in the city, that has been the comment that I've heard time and time again is we. A lot of the discussion at the time was no one will ever feel safe in tall buildings. No one will ever want to work on the top floors of skyscrapers. That the southern half of Manhattan is going to be gone. Like, no one will want to build buildings in that area again. And obviously none of that has been the case. Probably it took 3 to 4 years thereafter for people's memories to dull. And then we started to build skyscrapers again. And obviously the World Trade Center has been a really successful development. And I think the same will be true here. So obviously, again, don't have the benefit of that background and context, but looking today as a new New Yorker at some of what I assume are the lasting effects, it's really just increased security screening at the entrances to buildings. And we've all given up a little bit of our privacy in that we are comfortable with having our bags screened, and we're comfortable giving our personal information before we're allowed access to the towers. And I think once the pendulum does swing back, we're going to find a happy medium, which is going to be our, again, new normal moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been way too much kind of fear-mongering and discussion about how terrible cities are because they're dense. And there are plenty of dense cities that have not had the same kind of problems as New York. And I don't want to get into a discussion of why New York is different than other places and why it may have happened here. But point is, density by itself is not the issue. And the flip side of that is that the density of a city and all the aspects of a city provides so many benefits in terms of environmental benefits and social and cultural benefits. I mean, who's not gonna want to go back and see a Broadway show again? Of course, that's going to happen again. These things will come back. It's going to take a little bit of time for that to happen, but those kinds of things don't happen anywhere else but New York. And so there will be reasons for that to happen again, and there will be the time when it will happen again. And I think people who are signing off and saying, okay, I don't want to be in New York anymore, are cutting themselves short. So
Also, you know, you need not look further than history to see if this is something that is going to repeat itself. There was a huge cholera outbreak in London. London is still populated by millions of people, and we've adapted to life as a result of it, but no one has vacated cities in the UK. So I think a lot of people are sort of treating this as unprecedented, and it is for our time in the last 100 years, but it's happened tons of times before. And looking at trends, again, there may be a minor vacating of cities for a few years that follow, but people have very bad long-term memories, or very bad short-term memories, sorry, and typically you see that there is a repopulation of cities often in the 5 years that follow and into the future.
Yeah, and I'm more hopeful that this will maybe raise awareness about issues about sustainability and excuse me, the need to do something sooner rather than later. There's been a lot of, you know, warnings for many years now about the potential for a pandemic, and we, meaning the world, the globe, did not do everything it should have to put the preventions in place to keep that from happening. There have been equally, for a long time now, warnings about climate change and what ultimately can happen to the environment. The warning flags are flying, and so we should learn from this that we need to take action now before it's too late, and I'm hoping that that will help.
Yeah. Okay. We have a couple of questions coming in around what's going to happen when folks show up to the office, when they walk in.
Oh boy.
Goes back to
They'll go get a cup of coffee and then
yeah,
that's a loaded question.
No, it's not. So specifically, Zaid asks, for multi-tenant office buildings, are real estate owners adding sanitation and screening points at main lobby entrances or at every office entrance? And then another question that's related is, John, are tenants and real estate owners thinking of ways to manage building entries and common spaces, especially during what is typically peak hours? Will they need crowd control? So we're getting a lot of questions like that. So I'd love to hear from the panel just kind of what they envision for that experience to be exactly.
So I may want to take that one on, because I do work with a lot of landlords, and one of their highest concerns is the line that will form at the reception desk as well as the elevator lobby. You know, generally what I've heard and what I've experienced with New York-based landlords and people that are in charge of buildings is obviously they're willing to take ownership from the minute you touch the doors of the building, going up into the elevator at some point to the main door of your tenant space, but they are not going to touch anything within the tenant space. They're leaving the solutions to the tenants of what they want to do on the inside, and that's been pretty much the consistent direction for most building managers, and it's pretty much the same answer I hear on the tenant side. It goes back to those things regarding the consistency with security when it comes to reducing of congestion in the lobbies. But a lot of them are very scared, especially in the small lobbies, that if you maintain the 6-foot distancing, that people will be waiting outside of the building to get serviced. So that adaptation of giving more security control to the actual tenants to allow or restrict people from going up into their space without the control measure of the desk is certainly something that's coming up a lot. The elevator in itself is a very different conversation. There has been talk about reducing it to either 1, 2, or 4 individuals based on that type of occupancy. And even at a building that's 30% occupied at 9 o'clock in the morning, it will be very tricky to do that. I can tell that some people have still not figured out the right solutions how to do it, and a lot of them are trying to basically trying their best to find solutions. But again, with their current building layouts and landlord layouts, they're tricky. There has been solutions to utilize empty space, retail ground floor spaces, secondary spaces in building vacant retail areas or unused food service spaces as kind of decompression zones or secondary security clearances to alleviate foot traffic. But it always does come back to the elevator. So sometimes they're going to freight. Sometimes there's a line in an empty retail space. There's a lot of those different variations that people are trying to explore moving forward.
Well, these solutions are still in formation, but again, goes back to technology. And there are solutions in technology already that, you know, we've been talking with building owners for quite some time and installing in some of the lobbies we're doing, but it's going to accelerate this as well, where, you know, we have what we need. This little phone thing that's not showing up.
Yeah.
You know, you can put QR codes on people's phones, and they don't have to go to the security desk. A visitor who, if an organization is even going to allow visitors, but a visitor can be emailed a QR code so that they can gain access through the right turnstile, into the right elevator, go to the right floor without talking to anybody and having that level of security. These solutions exist. Destination dispatch elevators are going to be reprogrammed because, for instance, the optimal performance in the past for a destination dispatch elevator was to get the maximum number of people into a car before it went. Now it's going to be programmed to get the minimum number of people and maximize the number of trips instead of minimize the number of trips. And so the algorithms are going to change, but those destination dispatch systems will allow, I think, faster flow of people from the lobby to the floors. It's going to take time for these things to be implemented, but those are some of the solutions that are out there. And there's always going to be this kind of level of technology between us and the space.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got about 4 more minutes before we're going to jump into the breakout rooms. I guess I would just leave it open to each panelist. By the way, thank you all for coming on. You've been great. This has been very enlightening. And yeah, I mean, if you have any closing thoughts, you know, on this topic or kind of forward-looking observations, we'd love to hear them now, and then we'll jump into the breakout rooms. Open forum.
Well, I'll just jump in and say that, you know, I've been practicing architecture for over 40 years now, and it's exciting to me because this is accelerating change in ways that I think have been coming for many years. There's been slow and steady evolution of how we design, build, and occupy buildings, but this is really putting the pedal to the metal, and I think it'll be very exciting to see how all of this you know, impacts what we do over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's well said. A good perspective on that. Maybe Lance, and then Laura will close with you.
I will say, I think I agree with what Guy just said, and we are definitely embracing technology in definitely unique ways. And I have to say that technology is certainly people are finding ways to embrace simpler technology and definitely unique aspects to make it work for the professional environment. And I am going to definitely think that those technologies that were very challenging to adapt towards our professions are going to be modified, become easier to use, more affordable to use, more broader to the public, and people will definitely embrace and take them on more and more. If you think of the free technologies we use to communicate now, that may have been so costly not only 2 years ago, they certainly are going to be more effective, and we're going to use them because a greater group of people can. So I'm curious to see how that evolves and how technology becomes easier, more efficient, more user-friendly as the next 2 to 3 years go.
And I guess I'll wrap by suggesting, yes, there is an increased appetite for technology, and on the employee side, I think there's also increased an increased atmosphere of employees being willing to accept and to give back control to their employers insofar as what they're willing to compromise in that scenario. And so I would just suggest that companies are going to need to find a balance between protecting the privacy of their employees and the need for information that exists right now in order to enforce the safest environment possible. And so companies need to be mindful of how far down the surveillance rabbit hole they're willing to go, and the long-term effects that may have on the way that they run their business.
Yeah, an important point we didn't talk much about, but thanks for that. And I just want to say it was an honor and a pleasure to moderate this panel. I learned a lot. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And we look forward to seeing Laura, Guy, and Lance again at an upcoming meeting. Blake, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, guys. So on the screen there, you should have two things. Number one, there's the contact info. So sorry, Lance, Laura, and Guy, but if your LinkedIn's get blasted, it was part of signing up for this. So appreciate it. Same thing with you, Matt. But feel free to message these guys on LinkedIn and ask any other questions and make some good connections.